The thunder of hooves against hard, packed earth was the first warning Delilah Winters had that something was terribly wrong. She'd been gathering wildflowers in the meadow, her basket half full of California poppies and lupines, when the ground began to tremble beneath her feet. Time seemed to slow as she turned toward the sound, her honey-blonde hair whipping across her face as her eyes widened at the wall of dust rising over the horizon. It was 1873, and Delilah had been in Yuba City, California, for less than a month. At 22, she'd traveled west from Boston after her parents' passing, answering her uncle's invitation to help manage his general store. The wilderness of California was nothing like the civilized streets of Boston, and she was still learning the dangers of her new home. The rumbling grew louder, and suddenly they appeared wild mustangs, dozens of them, their powerful bodies surging forward in a frenzy of movement. Their eyes were wide with fear, nostrils flaring as they ran blindly ahead. Something had spooked them, sending the herd into a blind panic directly toward the meadow where Delilah stood frozen in terror. "Run!" A deep voice shouted from somewhere beyond her vision, but her legs refused to obey. The flowers spilled from her basket as it slipped from her trembling fingers. The horses were closing in rapidly, their thundering hooves kicking up clouds of dust that choked the air. Delilah finally managed to stumble backward, but her boot heel caught on her skirt, sending her sprawling onto the ground. The leader of the herd was less than 50 yards away when she heard the pounding of another horse approaching from her right. Through the haze of dust, she glimpsed a rider pushing his mount to extraordinary speed, racing parallel to the stampeding herd. The cowboy leaned low over his horse's neck, urging the animal faster as he cut a diagonal path toward Delilah. His face was partially obscured by a bandana pulled up against the dust, but his eyes were fixed on her with unwavering determination. As the distance closed between them, he extended his arm. "Take my hand," he shouted over the thunderous noise. Delilah reached up just as the cowboy's horse thundered alongside her. His strong fingers closed around her wrist, and with one powerful motion, he lifted her from the ground and swung her onto the saddle in front of him. His arm wrapped securely around her waist as he pulled the horse into a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding the leading edge of the stampede. "Hold on tight," he commanded, his voice close to her ear as they raced away from danger. Delilah clutched the saddle horn, her heart pounding as violently as the hooves of the mustangs that had nearly trampled her. The cowboy's chest was pressed against her back, solid and reassuring as they galloped toward safety. She caught glimpses of the wild horses as they continued their frenzied run across the meadow, exactly where she had been standing moments before. When they were well clear of danger, the cowboy slowed his horse to a trot, then a walk, finally stopping beneath the shade of an old oak tree. Only then did Delilah realize she'd been holding her breath. She exhaled shakily as the man loosened his grip on her waist. "You can breathe now, miss." "You're safe," he said, his voice gentler than before. He pulled down his bandana, revealing a strong jaw dusted with stubble and lips curved into a concerned frown. "Are you hurt?" Delilah turned slightly to look at her rescuer. Dust coated his features, but couldn't hide the sharp blue of his eyes or the genuine worry in them. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with brown hair that curled slightly where it escaped from beneath his hat. I don't think so," she managed, her voice unsteady. "Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Samuel Irwin," he replied, dismounting in one fluid motion before reaching up to help her down. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her effortlessly to the ground. "Most folks just call me Sam." "I'm Delilah Winters," she said, smoothing down her skirt with trembling hands. I'm new to Yuba City, obviously not well versed in avoiding stampedes yet. A hint of a smile touched Sam's lips. Not many folks are, Miss Winters. Those mustangs don't usually come this close to town. Something must have spooked them pretty bad. Delilah looked back toward the meadow, now empty save for the cloud of dust hanging in the air. Her basket of flowers was surely trampled beyond recognition. I was just picking wildflowers. I never imagined. The West has its own way of reminding us who's really in charge, Sam said, checking his horse's legs and patting the animal's neck. Good boy, Cinder. You earned an extra portion of oats today. The horse, a handsome black gelding with a white star on his forehead, nickered softly in response. He's beautiful, Delilah said, grateful for the distraction from her still racing heart. Fastest horse in Yuba County, Sam replied with undisguised pride. Been with me 5 years now. Couldn't ask for a better partner out here. He glanced toward town, then back at Delilah. May I escort you home, Miss Winters? After a scare like that, you shouldn't be walking alone. Delilah nodded, suddenly aware of how shaky her legs felt. That's very kind of you, Mr. Irwin. I'm staying with my uncle, Edward Winters. He owns the general store on Main Street. Old Ed is your uncle. Sam's expression brightened with recognition. He's a good man. Mentioned his niece was coming to help with the store. He offered his hand to help her back onto Cinder. Seems like you're making quite an entrance to our little town. Once they were both mounted, Sam guided the horse toward Yuba City at a gentle walk. Delilah was acutely aware of his arm around her waist again, maintaining a respectful hold but firm enough to keep her secure on the saddle. How did you happen to be there right when I needed help? She asked as they rode. I was tracking that herd, Sam explained. Wild horses fetch a good price when gentled properly. I've been watching them for weeks, learning their patterns. He paused, saw them get spooked by a mountain lion. When they changed direction toward the meadow, I spotted you there. Rest is history. Lucky coincidence, Delilah murmured. Sam chuckled softly. Out here, we don't much believe in coincidence, Miss Winters, but good timing, that I'll claim credit for. As they approached the outskirts of town, Delilah noticed people stopping to stare. A young woman riding double with a cowboy was apparently quite the spectacle in Yuba City. I'm afraid I might be damaging your reputation, Sam said with a hint of amusement in his voice. Better a damaged reputation than being trampled by wild horses, she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Sam laughed, a warm sound that she felt through his chest against her back. You might do just fine out west after all, Miss Winters. They arrived at the general store, where Edward Winters was arranging a display of canned goods in the window. When he spotted them, his bushy eyebrows shot up and he hurried outside. Delilah. What in heaven's name? Your niece had a close call with a stampede of mustangs, Mr. Winters, Sam explained as he dismounted, then helped Delilah down. Thought it best to see her safely home. Edward's weathered face paled. A stampede, good Lord. He pulled Delilah into a tight embrace before holding her at arm's length to inspect her. Are you hurt, child? I'm fine, Uncle Edward. Thanks to Mr. Irwin here. He rode into the midst of those horses and pulled me to safety. Edward turned to Sam, gratitude evident in his rheumy eyes. Samuel Irwin, you're a godsend. I can't thank you enough for protecting my niece. Sam shifted uncomfortably under the praise, adjusting his hat. Anyone would have done the same, sir. Not anyone could have, Edward insisted. You must join us for supper tonight. It's the least we can do. Sam glanced at Delilah, something unreadable in his expression. That's kind of you, but I wouldn't want to impose. Nonsense, Edward said. Delilah makes a fine beef stew, and I've just received a shipment of apple pie from Mrs. Holloway. 7 o'clock. Delilah found herself hoping he would accept. There was something about Samuel Irwin that intrigued her beyond his heroic rescue. After a moment's hesitation, Sam nodded. "I'd be honored, Mr. Winters. 7 o'clock it is." As Sam tipped his hat and mounted Cinder to ride away, Delilah watched him go, still feeling the phantom pressure of his arm around her waist. She had come west looking for a new beginning after loss. She never expected that beginning would involve wild horses, danger, and a mysterious cowboy with eyes the color of the California sky. "He's a good man," Edward said beside her, interrupting her thoughts. "One of the best horse trainers in the territory, keeps to himself mostly." "He saved my life," Delilah said simply. "Then I suspect we'll be seeing more of him," her uncle replied with a knowing smile. "Come inside now. You've had quite an adventure for one day." As they entered the store, Delilah cast one last glance in the direction Sam had ridden. Something told her this was just the beginning of her adventures in the West. The afternoon passed in a blur as Delilah helped her uncle in the store, all while her mind kept returning to the morning's events. Each time the bell above the door jingled, she found herself looking up, half expecting to see Sam's tall frame filling the doorway. But he didn't return, and by closing time, she was beginning to wonder if he would actually appear for dinner. "You've measured that same amount of coffee beans 3 times now," Edward observed with amusement as they prepared to close the store. "Something on your mind or someone?" Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking about the stampede, Uncle. It was frightening." "MMHMM," Edward hummed knowingly. "And I suppose the fact that a handsome young man is joining us for supper has nothing to do with your distraction." "Uncle Edward," Delilah protested, but couldn't help smiling. In the short time she'd been in Yuba City, she'd grown fond of her uncle's gentle teasing. "Go on upstairs and freshen up," he said kindly. "I'll finish closing the store." Their living quarters above the general store were modest but comfortable. Delilah had a small bedroom overlooking Main Street, while her uncle's room faced the back of the building. A cozy sitting room and kitchen completed their home. It was nothing like the Winters family home in Boston, but Delilah had quickly grown to appreciate its simplicity. After washing away the dust of the day, Delilah changed into one of her better dresses, a cornflower blue that her mother had always said matched her eyes. She hesitated before her small mirror, wondering if she should pin her hair up more elaborately, then chided herself for such vanity. This was merely a dinner to thank the man who had saved her life. Nothing more. Still, she found herself adding a touch of rose water to her wrists and throat before heading down to help with dinner preparations. By 6:45, the stew was simmering on the stove, filling the apartment with its rich aroma. Fresh bread from the bakery down the street was warming in the oven, and the apple pie was set on the sideboard. Delilah smoothed her apron and glanced nervously at the clock. "He'll be here," Edward assured her, settling into his armchair with his pipe. "Samuel Irwin is a man of his word." At precisely 7 o'clock, they heard a knock at the store's back entrance. Edward nodded at Delilah to answer it while he tapped out his pipe. When she opened the door, Delilah barely recognized Sam. Gone was the dust-covered cowboy from the morning. In his place stood a clean-shaven man in a pressed shirt and vest, his brown hair damp and neatly combed. He held his hat in his hands, revealing the full thickness of his hair and how it curled slightly at the ends. The only things unchanged were those piercing blue eyes, which widened slightly as they took in the sight of her. "Miss Winters," he said, his voice softer than it had been during their morning encounter. "You look recovered from your ordeal." "Mr. Irwin," she replied with a small smile. "Please come in, and yes, thanks to you, I'm quite well." Sam stepped inside, revealing a small package tucked under his arm. "I brought something for you," he said, offering it to her, "to replace what was lost." Delilah unwrapped the brown paper to find a small bouquet of wildflowers, California poppies, lupines, and others she had been gathering that morning. "I rode back to the meadow," he explained, a touch of color rising to his tan cheeks. "Thought you might like to finish your collection without the excitement this time." The thoughtfulness of the gesture left Delilah momentarily speechless. "That's incredibly kind of you," she finally managed, cradling the flowers. "Let me put these in water." Edward appeared from the sitting room, extending his hand to Sam. "Right on time, Samuel. Come in, come in. Can I offer you a whiskey before dinner?" "Thank you, sir. But I'm fine for now," Sam replied, following Edward into their modest dining area while Delilah arranged the wildflowers in a small jar throughout dinner. Delilah observed Sam with growing curiosity. He ate with surprisingly refined manners for a man who lived most of his life on horseback. He answered her uncle's questions about the horse business thoughtfully, and occasionally asked Delilah about her adjustment to life in Yuba City. There was an intelligence in his eyes that belied his frontier appearance. "So, Miss Winters," Sam said as they were finishing the main course, "what brings a Boston lady all the way to California? It's quite a journey." Delilah set down her fork. "My parents passed away last winter, influenza. They left me the house, but—" She paused, remembering the emptiness of rooms once filled with laughter. "It didn't feel like home anymore. When Uncle Edward wrote suggesting I might join him here, it seemed like the right time for a new beginning." "I'm sorry for your loss," Sam said quietly, and there was something in his voice that suggested he understood grief intimately. "New beginnings can be a powerful thing." "And what about you, Mr. Irwin?" she asked, eager to shift attention away from her own story. "Have you always been in Yuba City?" A shadow crossed his features briefly. "No, madam. I grew up in Missouri, came west after the war." "Samuel was a cavalry scout," Edward supplied. "Knows more about horses than anyone in the territory." Sam looked uncomfortable with the praise. "Just learned out of necessity. A good horse can be the difference between life and death out here. As I discovered today," Delilah said with a small smile. As Edward served the apple pie, the conversation turned to local matters: the railroad's slow progress toward Yuba City, the price of cattle, the upcoming Founders' Day celebration. "You should take Delilah to the Founders' Day dance, Samuel," Edward suggested, ignoring Delilah's mortified expression. "She hasn't had much opportunity to meet people her age since arriving." "Uncle Edward, Mr. Irwin surely has other obligations," Delilah said quickly. Sam looked at her thoughtfully. "Actually, I don't. If you'd allow me the honor, Miss Winters, I'd be happy to escort you to the dance." Delilah was surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Yes, that would be lovely." "Excellent." Edward clapped his hands together. "It's settled then. The dance is this Saturday evening." After dinner, Sam insisted on helping clear the table despite Delilah's protests. As they worked side by side in the small kitchen, she found herself stealing glances at his profile, noting the straight line of his nose and the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheekbones in the lamplight. "I want to thank you again," she said softly as she dried a plate. "Not just for this morning, but for the flowers and for agreeing to the dance. My uncle means well, but he can be rather forward." Sam smiled, passing her another clean dish. "No thanks needed. Truth be told, I've been wanting an excuse to attend the dance. Never seemed right going alone." He hesitated, then added, "Besides, I find myself wanting to know more about the lady brave enough to face down a stampede of wild horses." "Frozen in terror is hardly brave," Delilah countered. "You didn't scream or faint. Many would have." His eyes met hers. "There's different kinds of courage, Miss Winters." Something in his gaze made her heart flutter strangely. "Please call me Delilah. I think saving my life earns you that right." "Delilah," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Then you must call me Sam." The moment was broken by Edward calling from the sitting room, asking if they wanted coffee. The rest of the evening passed pleasantly, and when it came time for Sam to leave, Delilah found herself reluctant to see him go. At the door, Sam placed his hat on his head, then paused. "Would it be forward of me to ask if I might call on you before the dance? Perhaps show you some of the countryside from a safe distance from any wild herds, of course." "I'd like that," Delilah replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "Thursday afternoon." "The store closes early, doesn't it?" "Yes, at 3 o'clock, Sam nodded. "I'll be here at 3:15 then." He tipped his hat. "Good night, Delilah, Mr. Winters." After he left, Edward gave his niece a knowing look. "Told you we'd be seeing more of him." Delilah smiled, touching the wildflowers Sam had brought. "Yes, I suppose you did." That night, as she lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Yuba City settling into darkness, Delilah thought about the day's events. She had come west seeking a new start after loss, never expecting that a stampede of wild horses would lead her to a man like Samuel Irwin. She fell asleep with the scent of wildflowers drifting through her room, and the memory of strong arms holding her safely above danger. Thursday couldn't come soon enough. For the next few days, Delilah found herself watching the clock in the general store with unprecedented interest. On Tuesday, Sam came in briefly to purchase ammunition and coffee, exchanging only a few words with her under the watchful eye of her uncle. But the smile he gave her before leaving stayed with her for hours afterward. On Wednesday, Delilah heard news of the Cowboy when Mrs. Peterson came to purchase flour. "That Samuel Irwin saved the Carson boys' colt yesterday," the woman informed Edward as Delilah weighed out the flour. "Poor thing got its leg caught in some barbed wire out near the south pasture. Would have died for sure, but Sam happened by and knew just how to free it without causing more damage. That man has a way with horses like nobody I've ever seen." Delilah pretended to be focused on her task, but she was absorbing every word. The more she learned about Sam, the more intriguing he became. When Thursday finally arrived, Delilah found herself rushing through the afternoon inventory and changing her dress twice, before settling on a practical but pretty green riding skirt and white blouse. At precisely 3:15, the sound of hoofbeats outside the store made her heart skip. Sam arrived on Cinder, leading a gentle-looking Palomino mare. He dressed in clean work clothes, not as formal as his dinner attire, but clearly chosen with care. When Delilah appeared, he removed his hat. "Afternoon, Delilah. This is Sunflower," he said, patting the Palomino's neck. "Thought you might prefer your own mount. She's the gentlest horse I've ever trained." Delilah approached the mare cautiously, holding out her hand for the horse to sniff. Sunflower's velvety nose tickled her palm. "She's beautiful." "She suits you," Sam replied, then immediately looked as though he wished he could take back the words. "I mean, she's well-mannered and intelligent, like yourself." Delilah hid her smile as Sam helped her mount, his strong hands encircling her waist briefly. The touch sent a pleasant warmth through her, even through layers of clothing. "Where are we headed?" she asked once she was settled in the saddle. "There's a place not far from here, a ridge overlooking the valley. Thought you might enjoy the view." Sam mounted Cinder. "Ready." They rode at a leisurely pace through Yuba City, attracting curious glances from townspeople. Delilah was acutely aware that riding out alone with a man would have been scandalous in Boston, but the West operated under different rules. Still, She noticed Sam maintained a respectful distance between their horses once they were out of town. "You ride well," he observed as they followed a narrow trail through golden hills dotted with oak trees. "My father insisted on riding lessons," Delilah explained. "Though Boston riding is quite different from this. More ceremony, less practical skill." "I imagine there are many differences between Boston and Yuba City," Sam said, guiding Cinder around a rocky outcropping. "Do you miss it?" "The city life," Delilah considered the question. "I miss certain comforts, libraries, concerts, paved streets, but there's something about this place." She gestured to the vast landscape spread before them. "It feels more real somehow, less constrained." Sam nodded. "That's what drew me here after the war, space to breathe, room to start fresh." "Were you in many battles?" she asked hesitantly. A shadow crossed his face. "Enough to last a lifetime. Mostly I scouted road ahead to map terrain and locate Confederate positions." He was quiet for a moment. "Lost my brother at Gettysburg. After that, nothing back east felt right anymore." "I'm so sorry," Delilah said softly, understanding his loss all too well. "It was a long time ago," Sam replied, though his expression suggested the wound was still fresh. "Here we are." They had reached the ridge he'd mentioned. Sam dismounted and helped Delilah down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. The view took her breath away, the Yuba River winding like a silver ribbon through the valley, distant mountains rising blue in the west, and rolling golden hills stretching in all directions. "It's magnificent," she whispered. "Thought you'd appreciate it." Sam led her to a flat rock where they could sit comfortably. He pulled a small bundle from his saddlebag. "Brought some provisions if you're hungry." The provisions turned out to be fresh bread, cheese, dried apples, and a small jar of honey, simple but perfect for their hillside picnic. As they ate, Sam pointed out landmarks in the distance, telling stories of the region's history. "The Maidu people lived here for thousands of years before gold was discovered," he explained. "They say they could talk to the animals, especially the horses that roamed these hills." "You believe that?" Delilah asked, fascinated. Sam's lips curved into a smile. "I believe there's a language beyond words when it comes to horses. They understand more than we think." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to show you sometime how to approach a wild horse, earn its trust." "I'd like that," Delilah replied, realizing she meant it. The idea both frightened and excited her. They talked easily as the afternoon progressed, discovering shared interests in books. He carried Whitman's Leaves of Grass in his saddlebag, and music. She played piano, he the harmonica. Delilah found herself laughing more than she had since before her parents' deaths, and Sam seemed to grow more relaxed in her company, the reserve he showed in town gradually melting away. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in magnificent shades of orange and pink, Sam grew quiet, gazing out over the valley. "Penny for your thoughts?" Delilah asked softly. He turned to look at her, his blue eyes reflecting the golden light. "I was thinking that I'm glad those horses stampeded when they did." "You're glad I was nearly trampled," she teased. "I'm glad I was there to prevent it," he clarified, his expression suddenly serious. "And I'm glad it gave me a reason to know you, Delilah Winters." There was something in his voice that made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her hand, but instead he stood and offered to help her up. "We should head back before dark," he said, though he seemed reluctant. The ride back to town was quieter, a comfortable silence between them as they each processed the afternoon. When they reached the general store, Sam helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Thank you for today," Delilah said, reluctant for their time together to end. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much since coming west." "The pleasure was mine," Sam replied. He hesitated, then added, "I'm still planning to escort you to the Founders' Day dance on Saturday if that's still agreeable to you." "Very much so," Delilah confirmed, pleased that he'd mentioned it. "I'll call for you at 7 then." He mounted Cinder, tipped his hat, and with a final smile rode away with Sunflower in tow. Delilah watched until he disappeared around the corner, then went inside to find her uncle pretending to be deeply interested in a ledger. "Pleasant afternoon?" Edward asked innocently. "Very," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Samuel Irwin is a fine man," her uncle observed. "Been through hardship, but it's only made him stronger. Haven't seen him take an interest in anyone since he came to Yuba City." Delilah felt her cheeks warm. "We're just becoming friends, Uncle Edward." "Of course," he replied, not bothering to hide his smile. "Just friends." But as she went about her evening chores, Delilah found her thoughts continuously returning to the afternoon, the warmth of Sam's smile, the gentleness in his eyes when he spoke of horses, the way his hand had seemed to linger at her waist. Perhaps it was more than friendship that was growing between them, something as vast and promising as the California landscape he'd shown her. Saturday couldn't arrive soon enough. The Founders' Day celebration began early on Saturday morning with a parade down Main Street. Delilah and Edward stood outside their store, watching as local ranchers showcased their finest horses. The volunteer fire brigade demonstrated their new pump wagon, and children marched with patriotic banners. Delilah found herself scanning the crowds for Sam but didn't spot him. "Looking for someone?" Edward asked with poorly concealed amusement. "Just taking in the festivities," Delilah replied primly, though she knew her uncle wasn't fooled. As the day progressed, the town square filled with booths selling food, handicrafts, and games of skill. Delilah helped her uncle run a booth selling candies and small toys, enjoying the festive atmosphere. By late afternoon, they closed up shop, and Edward insisted she take ample time to prepare for the evening's dance. "A lady should never feel rushed in her preparations," he declared, shooing her upstairs. Delilah took special care with her appearance, selecting her finest dress, a deep blue silk with delicate lace trim that her mother had insisted she bring west for special occasions. She arranged her hair in a more sophisticated style than her usual practical bun, letting soft curls frame her face. As she pinned a small cameo brooch at her throat, a gift from her father on her 18th birthday, Delilah found herself wondering what Sam would think of her transformation from shopkeeper to lady. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at the door downstairs. Delilah took a deep breath, checking her reflection one final time before descending the stairs. She heard her uncle's greeting, then Sam's deeper voice in response, but couldn't make out their words. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, the conversation abruptly ceased. Sam stood in the doorway, hat in hand, dressed in a proper suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, and his boots polished to a shine. But it was the look in his eyes as he saw her that made Delilah's heart flutter. "Miss Winters," he said softly, seeming to have forgotten his permission to use her first name. "You look absolutely beautiful." "Thank you, Mr. Irwin," she replied with equal formality, though a smile tugged at her lips. "You look quite handsome yourself." Edward cleared his throat. "Well, don't you two make a fine pair? Samuel, I expect you to have my niece home at a reasonable hour, though I trust you completely, of course." "Yes, sir," Sam nodded seriously. "You have my word." He offered Delilah his arm, and she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, noticing how solid and warm he felt beneath the fine fabric of his jacket. "I've arranged for a buggy tonight," Sam explained as they stepped outside. "Didn't think your fine dress would fare well on horseback." Sure enough, a neat buggy pulled by a handsome bay horse waited at the curb. Sam helped her up, his hands encircling her waist with now familiar strength, before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "You continue to surprise me, Sam Irwin," Delilah said as they set off toward the town hall. First wildflowers, then a picnic with honey, now a buggy. Sam's lips quirked into a half-smile. "Don't want you thinking all cowboys are uncivilized, Miss Winters." The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with colorful bunting draped from the rafters and lanterns casting a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band played in one corner, and couples were already whirling around the dance floor when they arrived. Delilah was immediately struck by how many people greeted Sam with genuine warmth and respect. Ranchers clapped him on the shoulder, matrons smiled approvingly, and even the town's mayor came over to shake his hand. She realized that despite his solitary nature, Samuel Irwin was deeply integrated into the community. "Would you care to dance?" Sam asked after they'd made their initial rounds of greeting. "I'd be delighted," Delilah replied, placing her hand in his outstretched one. As they moved onto the dance floor, Sam placed his hand at the small of her back, keeping a proper distance between them. Delilah was pleasantly surprised to discover he was an excellent dancer, leading her confidently through the waltz. "Another hidden talent, Mr. Irwin," she teased. "My mother insisted," he explained with a smile. "Said no son of hers would grow up without knowing how to properly escort a lady around a dance floor. She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Sam replied, a flicker of sadness passing through his eyes. "Passed on when I was 17. But her lessons stuck." Delilah instinctively moved a fraction closer. "You've endured a great deal of loss." Sam's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "As have you, perhaps that's why." He trailed off, seeming unsure how to continue. "Why what?" she prompted gently as they turned with the music. His blue eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Why I feel like you understand parts of me that I've never shared with anyone else." Before Delilah could respond, the music ended, and they found themselves surrounded by other couples. The moment of intimacy was broken, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of deeper feelings beginning to take root. Throughout the evening, they danced several more times, sampled the refreshments, and chatted with townspeople. Delilah was introduced to so many new faces that she knew she'd never remember all the names, but she was touched by how warmly the community welcomed her as Sam's companion. During a livelier tune, Sam led her outside to the porch where several benches had been placed for those seeking cooler air. The night was perfect, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of nearby jasmine, and the distant music providing a pleasant backdrop to their conversation. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Sam asked as they settled on a bench. "Very much," Delilah replied honestly. "Everyone has been so welcoming. They're good people, hard-working, straightforward." He paused. "Not as refined as Boston society, I imagine." "I find I prefer it," she admitted. "In Boston, there were so many unspoken rules, so much emphasis on appearance and social standing. Here, people seem to value character above all else." Sam nodded. "Out here, what matters is whether you can be trusted, whether you keep your word. The rest is just window dressing." A comfortable silence fell between them as they gazed out at the starlit landscape. In the distance, a coyote called, its haunting cry echoing across the hills. "Sam," Delilah said suddenly, turning toward him, "may I ask you something? Anything?" "The wild horses that stampeded, what happened to them?" A smile touched his lips. "They're fine. Settled back in their usual grazing area about 5 miles north of where you encountered them. I checked on them yesterday." "Could you?" She hesitated, then pressed on. Could you show me? From a safe distance, of course. I'd like to see them when they're not charging directly at me. Sam studied her face, seeming to search for something in her expression. You're not afraid after what happened? I'm terrified, Delilah admitted with a small laugh. But I also feel like I should face that fear, and I trust you to keep me safe. Something in his eyes softened at her words. I'd be honored to show you. Perhaps next weekend, if your uncle can spare you for a day. I'd like that very much. The music inside changed to another waltz, and Sam stood, offering his hand. One more dance before I take you home. Delilah placed her hand in his, feeling a current of warmth where their skin touched. I'd be delighted. This time when they danced, Sam held her slightly closer than before, still entirely proper, but with an intimacy that hadn't been there earlier. Delilah was acutely aware of the strength in his hand at her waist, the clean scent of his shaving soap, and the way his eyes rarely left hers as they moved across the floor. As the evening drew to a close, Sam drove her home in the buggy, the streets of Yuba City quiet except for the sounds of other revelers making their way home from the dance. When they reached the general store, Sam helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Delilah said softly, reluctant for their time together to end. The pleasure was all mine, Sam replied. In the moonlight, his features were cast in silver and shadow, making him look almost ethereal. There was a moment, a heartbeat of silence, where Delilah thought he might kiss her. His gaze dropped briefly to her lips, and he seemed to lean forward slightly. But then he straightened, offering his arm instead to escort her to the door. Good night, Delilah, he said when they reached the entrance. I'll call on you tomorrow about our ride to see the wild horses. Good night, Sam, she replied, feeling both disappointed and relieved. Things were moving quickly between them, and yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward this quiet, thoughtful cowboy. As she watched him drive away, Delilah touched her cameo brooch thoughtfully. Her mother had always said that true love came not with fireworks and grand gestures, but with a quiet certainty, a feeling of coming home. Standing there in the moonlight, watching Sam's silhouette disappear into the night, Delilah wondered if this might be the beginning of what her mother had described. The following week passed in a pleasant blur for Delilah. Sam called at the store nearly every day, sometimes just for a few minutes to purchase supplies, other times lingering to help her stock shelves or chat during quiet periods. Edward watched their growing closeness with poorly concealed approval, finding increasingly transparent excuses to leave them alone together. By the time Saturday arrived, Delilah had exchanged her initial nerves about seeing the wild horses for genuine excitement. Sam arrived early in the morning, leading both Cinder and Sunflower, with saddlebags that suggested he'd planned for a full day's excursion. I've packed us a picnic, he explained as he helped her mount. Thought we might make a day of it if that suits you. That sounds perfect, Delilah replied, settling comfortably in the saddle. She'd worn her practical riding skirt again, along with a sturdy blouse and boots. Her hair was secured in a simple braid to keep it from tangling in the wind. They rode north out of town, following the meandering path of a creek that eventually fed into the Yuba River. The day was perfect, clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, and wildflowers painting the hillsides in vibrant colors. As they rode, Sam pointed out local landmarks and shared stories of the area's history, both native and settler. The Maidu people believed these hills were sacred, he explained as they crested a rise overlooking a particularly beautiful valley. They said the wild horses were messengers between our world and the spirit world. You believe in such things? Delilah asked, curious about his views. Sam considered her question thoughtfully. "I believe there's more to this world than what we can see and touch. And I've seen enough of wild horses to know they possess a wisdom and dignity that seems almost otherworldly at times." They rode for nearly 2 hours, gradually climbing higher into the foothills. The terrain grew rockier, dotted with gnarled oak trees and stands of pine. Finally, Sam signaled for them to stop at a sheltered overlook. "We'll leave the horses here," he said quietly, dismounting before helping Delilah down. "From now on, we'll go on foot, less chance of being detected." He secured their horses in the shade, making sure they had access to water from his canteen. Then he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small brass spyglass. "It's about a quarter mile to where they usually graze this time of day," he explained. "We'll approach from downwind, stay low to the ground." Delilah nodded, suddenly nervous but determined. Sam seemed to sense her apprehension and offered a reassuring smile. "Stay close to me. Step where I step. And if I signal you to stop or get down, do it immediately." Wild horses have incredible senses. They can smell, hear, and see danger from great distances. They set off on foot, Sam leading the way with a natural stealth that spoke of his cavalry scouting days. Delilah did her best to mimic his movements, placing her feet carefully to avoid snapping twigs or dislodging stones. The terrain was challenging, uphill and rocky, but the anticipation of what awaited them kept her moving forward without complaint. After about 20 minutes of careful hiking, Sam stopped suddenly, dropping to a crouch and motioning for Delilah to do the same. His finger went to his lips in the universal signal for silence, then pointed ahead. They had reached the edge of a small plateau. Beyond it, a natural basin spread out, carpeted with lush grass and dotted with small pools of water. And there, moving like living shadows across the landscape, was the herd, at least 30 wild horses grazing peacefully in the morning sun. Sam motioned for Delilah to crawl forward until they reached the shelter of a large boulder. From this position, they had an excellent view of the herd while remaining hidden from sight. He offered her the spyglass. Delilah raised it to her eye and gasped softly as the distant horses suddenly appeared close enough to touch. They were magnificent muscular bodies rippling with strength, manes and tails flowing like banners in the breeze. Some were solid-colored bays, blacks and chestnuts, while others bore distinctive markings. At the edge of the herd, several foals frolicked, their spindly legs carrying them in playful circles around their mothers. "They're beautiful," she whispered, lowering the spyglass to look at Sam. "See that large black stallion near the center?" he whispered back, pointing. "That's their leader, the one who nearly ran you down. I call him Midnight." Delilah raised the spyglass again, focusing on the horse Sam had indicated. The stallion stood apart from the others, his head held high, ears constantly moving as he surveyed his domain. Even from this distance, she could sense his power and authority. "How do you know it's the same herd?" she asked, genuinely curious. "The markings," Sam explained. "Each herd has distinctive combinations, and see the white star on Midnight's forehead. Not many black stallions have that marking." As they watched, Midnight suddenly raised his head higher, nostrils flaring. In an instant, his posture changed from relaxed to alert. "He sensed something," Sam murmured, taking the spyglass back to survey the area. There to the east, mountain lion. Delilah followed his gaze and caught a glimpse of tawny movement among the rocks on the opposite side of the basin. The mountain lion was large and sleek, its intent focus on the herd unmistakable. "Will it attack?" she whispered anxiously. "Probably not," Sam replied. "It's looking for weakness, a foal that strays too far or an older horse that can't keep up, but Midnight won't let that happen." Sure enough, the stallion let out a piercing neigh, causing the entire herd to snap to attention. Within seconds, the horses had formed a protective circle, with the foals and older mares in the center and the stronger horses facing outward. Midnight pawed the ground, challenging the predator. The mountain lion held its position for several long moments, seemingly calculating its chances. Then, with fluid grace, it turned and disappeared back into the rocks. Amazing, Delilah breathed. They work together so perfectly. That's how they survive, Sam said, a note of admiration in his voice. Each knows its place in the herd, its responsibilities. Midnight would die to protect them, and they know it. They watched for nearly an hour as the herd gradually relaxed back into grazing. Sam pointed out various horses, explaining their roles and relationships within the group. His knowledge was extensive, and his genuine respect for the animals was evident in every word. "You really love them, don't you?" Delilah observed quietly. Sam nodded. "They represent everything I admire: freedom, strength, loyalty. They live by their own rules, not ours." "Yet you capture and train horses for a living," she pointed out, careful to keep any judgment from her voice. "I only take what the land can spare," he replied thoughtfully. "Never the lead stallion or the mares with foals. And I treat them with respect, give them good lives. It's a balance." The sun had risen high overhead when Sam finally suggested they retreat. They backed away carefully, making sure to stay downwind and out of sight until they were well clear of the basin. "That was incredible," Delilah said once they could speak normally again. "Thank you for sharing it with me." "You're the first person I've ever brought here," Sam admitted as they made their way back toward their waiting horses. "Most folks around here see wild horses as either nuisances or profit. They don't appreciate what they really are." "And what are they, truly?" she asked. He stopped, turning to face her. "They're a reminder that no matter how much we think we've tamed this land, there are still things beyond our control, still wild places where nature rules, not man." His blue eyes held hers intently. "That's worth protecting, don't you think?" "Yes," Delilah agreed softly. "Very much so." Something shifted in Sam's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight parting of his lips. For a moment, Delilah thought he might kiss her, there in the wild hills with only the wind and birds as witnesses. Her heart raced at the possibility. Instead, he reached out slowly and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her braid behind her ear, his fingers lingering briefly against her cheek. The touch was feather-light but sent warmth cascading through her. "We should get back to the horses," he said, his voice lower than before. "I know a perfect spot for our picnic." The moment passed, but something had changed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings growing too strong to ignore. As they returned to Cinder and Sunflower, Delilah found herself wondering what it would be like to be as free as those wild horses, to follow her heart without the constraints of society's expectations. They rode to a beautiful spot overlooking the Yuba River, where Sam spread a blanket beneath the shade of an ancient oak tree. The picnic he'd prepared was simple but perfect: cold chicken, freshly baked bread, apples, and a surprise of chocolate squares that he'd purchased specially from the confectioner in town. As they ate, their conversation flowed easily, touching on their childhoods, books they'd read, and dreams for the future. Delilah found herself opening up about her parents in ways she hadn't been able to since their deaths, sharing funny stories and fond memories instead of focusing on her loss. "They would have liked you," she told Sam, surprising herself with the admission. "My father always said he could judge a man by how he treated his horse." "And how would I have measured up?" Sam asked with a smile. "Very well indeed," Delilah replied honestly. Though my mother might have tried to tame your wild ways a bit, Sam laughed. Many have tried, few have succeeded. Is that a challenge, Mr. Irwin? The words slipped out before Delilah could consider their implication. Sam's expression grew serious as he looked at her. Only if you're offering, Miss Winters. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibilities. Delilah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. She opened her mouth to respond, though she wasn't entirely sure what she would say. Before she could speak, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted the moment. They both looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the western horizon. Storm's coming in fast, Sam observed, standing quickly. We should head back before it hits. They packed up their picnic with efficient haste and mounted their horses. Sam led them at a quick pace back toward Yuba City, but the storm moved faster than anticipated. They were still a good 5 miles from town when the first fat raindrops began to fall. There's a lined shack about half a mile east, Sam called over the rising wind. We can wait out the worst of it there. Delilah nodded, already feeling the rain soaking through her clothes. They veered east, pushing their horses to a canter as the sky opened up in earnest. Lightning flashed across the darkened sky, followed by a boom of thunder that made Sunflower sidestep nervously. Easy, girl, Delilah soothed, patting the horse's neck. Despite her own discomfort, she found she wasn't frightened, not with Sam leading the way, his broad shoulders set with determination against the elements. The lined shack appeared as a dark silhouette against the stormy sky, a simple one-room structure used by cowboys when working distant parts of the range. Sam dismounted quickly and led both horses under a lean-to attached to one side of the building, while Delilah hurried to the door. Inside, the shack was basic but dry: a small iron stove in one corner, a narrow cot against one wall, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Sam joined her moments later, shaking rain from his hat before hanging it on a peg by the door. Not exactly the Plaza Hotel, he said with a rueful smile, but it'll keep us dry until this blows over. It's perfect, Delilah replied sincerely, wringing water from her braid. Now that they were out of the rain, she became aware of how thoroughly soaked she was, her clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. Sam seemed to notice her discomfort. There should be some dry blankets in that trunk, he said, nodding toward a wooden chest at the foot of the cot. And I'll get a fire going. Turn your back, and you can take off your wet things and wrap up in a blanket. I promise not to look. Delilah flushed at the impropriety of the suggestion, but practicality won out over modesty. She was chilled to the bone and risked illness if she remained in her wet clothes. She nodded and turned to the trunk while Sam busied himself with the stove, deliberately keeping his back to her. Inside the trunk, she found several rough wool blankets that smelled faintly of wood smoke, but were clean and, most importantly, dry. Turning her back to Sam, she quickly removed her soaked blouse and skirt, hanging them over the back of a chair, then wrapped one of the larger blankets around herself like a shawl. It covered her from shoulders to ankles, preserving her modesty while allowing her undergarments to dry. Decent? Sam asked, still facing the stove where he had kindled a small fire. Yes, thank you, she replied, settling into one of the chairs. You should get out of your wet things as well. Sam nodded, taking another blanket from the trunk. I'll step outside for a moment. Don't be silly, Delilah protested. It's pouring rain. I'll turn my back. She did so, focusing intently on the rough wood grain of the table while listening to the rustling sounds of Sam changing. Outside, the storm raged on, rain drumming against the roof and wind whistling through the eaves. All right, Sam said after a moment. Delilah turned to find him draped in a blanket much like her own. His wet clothes hung carefully near the stove where the growing warmth would dry them. His hair was damp and tousled, making him look younger and somewhat vulnerable, a stark contrast to his usual composed demeanor. "Quite a predicament," he said with a half-smile, taking the seat across from her. "Not exactly how I planned our day to end." "I find I don't mind," Delilah admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "It's been a perfect day, rain and all." Sam's eyes softened. "Even with the threat of scandal, your uncle might not be pleased to know you're stranded in a lined shack with me." "My uncle trusts you," Delilah replied. "As do I." Something flickered in Sam's expression, gratitude, perhaps, or something deeper. "That means a great deal to me, Delilah." The use of her first name in this intimate setting sent a pleasant shiver through her that had nothing to do with her damp condition. They fell silent for a moment, listening to the storm and the crackling of the fire in the stove. "Are you warming up?" Sam asked eventually, his concern genuine. "Yes, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier about the wild horses representing freedom." "What about it?" "I think I understand better now after seeing them today. There's something pure about their existence, uncomplicated by the rules and expectations we humans create for ourselves." She met his gaze. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to live that way, to follow one's heart without worrying what others might think." Sam studied her face, his blue eyes intent. "Is that what you want, Delilah? Freedom from expectations?" "I'm not sure what I want," she admitted. "When I came west, I was running from grief, looking for a new beginning I never expected." She trailed off, suddenly shy. "Never expected what?" he prompted gently. Delilah gathered her courage. "I never expected to meet someone like you. Someone who makes me question everything I thought I knew about myself and what I want from life." Sam's expression grew serious. He reached across the table, his hand extended, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. After a moment's hesitation, Delilah placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers as they curled around hers. "I've lived most of my adult life alone," he said quietly. "After the war, after losing my brother, I couldn't bear to be around people much. The horses were simpler. They don't ask questions, don't expect you to be something you're not." He paused, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "But since that day in the meadow, when I saw you standing there with those wild horses bearing down on you, something changed." "What changed?" Delilah asked, barely above a whisper. "For the first time in years, I found myself thinking about more than just surviving, found myself looking forward to seeing someone each day." His eyes held hers. "Found myself falling in love." The words hung in the air between them, as powerful as the storm outside. Delilah's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead at double speed. "Sam," she breathed, uncertain how to respond to such a direct declaration. He shook his head slightly. "You don't need to say anything. I know it's too soon, too sudden. I wanted you to know, in case you were wondering if your feelings were one-sided." "They're not," Delilah said quickly, squeezing his hand. "One-sided, I mean, I've never felt this way before, not about anyone. It terrifies me how strongly I feel, how quickly." A smile spread across Sam's face, not his usual reserved smile, but one of genuine joy that transformed his features. "Delilah Winters, you continue to surprise me." Outside, the storm began to abate, the pounding rain softening to a gentle patter. But neither of them moved, reluctant to break the moment of connection. "What happens now?" Delilah asked eventually. "Now," Sam replied, "I think we take things one day at a time, get to know each other better, do things properly." His eyes twinkled. "Starting with getting you home before your uncle sends out a search party." Delilah laughed, some of the tension dissolving. "He does worry." They checked their clothes, finding them still damp but wearable. With reluctance, they took turns dressing, maintaining their earlier protocol of turned backs and respectable distance. As Delilah buttoned her blouse, she found herself thinking of how different this man was from the suitors her parents had approved of in Boston, men with smooth hands and polished manners who had never known real hardship or demonstrated real courage. When they were both dressed, Sam checked outside. "Rain's nearly stopped. If we ride now, we can make it back before dark." The ride back to Yuba City was peaceful, the landscape washed clean by the storm and glowing in the late afternoon sunlight. They rode side by side where the trail allowed, talking easily about everything and nothing, occasionally lapsing into comfortable silences. As the buildings of town came into view, Delilah felt a curious mix of disappointment that their day was ending and excitement for what the future might hold. Sam seemed to share her sentiment, slowing Cinder's pace as if to prolong their time together. They reached the general store just as the sun was beginning to set. Edward was waiting on the porch, relief washing over his features when he spotted them. "There you are." "I was beginning to worry with that storm," he called as they dismounted. "We found shelter until it passed," Sam explained, helping Delilah down from Sunflower. "I apologize for returning her so late, Mr. Winters." Edward waved away his concern. "You kept her safe, that's what matters. Come inside, both of you. Mrs. Peterson dropped off a fresh apple pie and I've got coffee brewing." As they followed her uncle inside, Sam's hand brushed against Delilah's, a brief, perhaps accidental touch that nonetheless sent warmth through her entire body. When their eyes met, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever path lay ahead, they would walk it together. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Delilah's life. Sam called at the store almost daily, sometimes just for a few minutes, other times staying to help with deliveries or accounting. On Sundays after church, he would take her riding or on picnics, always with Edward's blessing. Their relationship blossomed under the watchful but approving eyes of the town, and Delilah found herself becoming fully integrated into the community of Yuba City. One particularly beautiful October afternoon, nearly 3 months after their first meeting, Sam arrived at the store with an unusual request. "I'd like to show you my place," he said as they stood in the quiet back room where Delilah was inventorying supplies. "If you're willing." Delilah looked up in surprise. Although Sam had mentioned his small ranch several times, he had never invited her there before. She understood it was his sanctuary, his private refuge from the world. "I'd be honored," she replied sincerely. "Your uncle is welcome to accompany us," Sam added quickly. "For propriety's sake." Delilah smiled at his consideration. "I'll ask him, but I suspect he'll decline. He trusts you implicitly, Sam." Sure enough, when informed of the invitation, Edward merely winked and claimed he had far too much inventory to complete to possibly join them. They set out the following morning, riding side by side through the golden autumn landscape. As they traveled farther from town, Delilah noticed Sam becoming more animated, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the land they passed through. It was clear he felt most at home in these open spaces, away from the constraints of town life. After about an hour's ride, they crested a small hill and Sam drew Cinder to a halt. "There it is," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's not much, but it's mine." Below them stretched a modest but well-maintained property. A small cabin sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. Nearby stood a sturdy barn and corral where several horses grazed peacefully. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods whose leaves had turned brilliant gold with the season. Beyond the immediate homestead, rolling pastureland extended to distant hills. "It's beautiful," Delilah said truthfully. The place had a quiet dignity about it, nothing fancy or pretentious, but solid and welcoming, much like its owner. Sam's expression softened at her approval. "Been working on it for 5 years now. Started with just the cabin and 10 acres. Added the rest bit by bit." They rode down to the property, where a surprise awaited Delilah. As they approached the corral, she spotted a familiar black stallion with a white star on his forehead. "Midnight." She gasped, unable to believe the wild stallion she had seen leading the herd was now standing calmly in Sam's corral. Sam shook his head, though he looked pleased at her reaction. "His son. I call him Starlight. Same marking, same spirit, but he was born in captivity. His mother was a wild mare I rescued after she was injured." As if recognizing his name, the horse trotted over to the fence, extending his elegant neck toward them. Sam dismounted and helped Delilah down before approaching the stallion with evident affection. "He's magnificent," Delilah said, watching as the horse nuzzled Sam's outstretched hand. "He's the best of both worlds," Sam explained, stroking the stallion's glossy neck. "Wild spirit but trusting of humans. I've been training him for over a year now." He turned to Delilah. "Would you like to meet him?" Delilah approached cautiously, remembering all too well the terror of seeing wild horses charging toward her. But Starlight merely regarded her with intelligent curiosity, his ears pricked forward. "Hold your hand flat, palm up," Sam instructed. "Let him come to you." Delilah did as directed, holding her breath as the stallion stretched his neck toward her, nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. After a moment's consideration, he gently bumped his muzzle against her palm. "He likes you," Sam said, smiling. "He's an excellent judge of character." After introducing her to the other horses, Sam showed her around his property. The cabin was small but meticulously maintained, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and a single bedroom visible through a partially open door. Everything was simple but functional, with occasional touches: a hand-woven Navajo blanket on the wall, a shelf of well-worn books, a polished mahogany box that Sam explained had belonged to his father that spoke of the man who lived there. "It's not much compared to what you're used to in Boston," Sam said, watching her reaction carefully. "It's perfect," Delilah replied honestly. "It feels like a home, not just a house." Sam's expression warmed at her words. He built up the fire in the small stone fireplace, then busied himself preparing coffee and setting out bread and preserves on the rough-hewn table. As they ate, he shared his plans for the ranch, expanding the corral, adding more grazing land, perhaps building a larger house someday. "I started with just breeding horses for local ranchers," he explained, "but lately I've been focusing more on training, especially gentling wild ones. Like you did with Starlight's mother," he nodded. "Wild horses have something special and intelligence, a spirit that domestically raised horses sometimes lack, but they need the right handling, patience." He looked at her with sudden intensity. "I'd like to show you something." They walked to a fenced meadow beyond the main corral. Inside were 3 horses that Delilah immediately recognized from the wild herd. They had observed a dappled gray mare and 2 younger horses, probably her offspring. "The mare injured her leg badly about a month ago," Sam explained. "Caught in a trap some fool set for wolves. The young ones wouldn't leave her, so I brought them all in. Been treating her wound, giving them shelter." He leaned against the fence. "Once she's healed, I'll release them back to the herd." "You really do care about them," Delilah observed. "It's not just business for you." "They deserve our respect," Sam replied simply. Then he glanced at her. "Would you like to try approaching the younger one, the chestnut? She's the most curious." Delilah hesitated only briefly before nodding. Sam opened the gate and led her into the meadow, moving slowly and speaking in a low, soothing voice. The horses watched them warily but didn't flee. "Stay relaxed," Sam murmured, guiding her forward with a gentle hand at the small of her back. "They can sense fear or tension." Delilah took a deep breath, consciously relaxing her shoulders. She followed Sam's lead, moving slowly and steadily toward the chestnut filly who stood her ground, ears flicking with interest. "That's it," Sam encouraged. "Now stop and let her decide." They halted about 10 feet from the young horse. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, to Delilah's amazement, the filly took a tentative step toward them, then another. Sam placed a small apple in Delilah's palm. "Hold it flat, like I showed you with Starlight." Heart pounding with excitement, Delilah extended her hand. The filly approached cautiously, sniffing the air. When she was close enough, she delicately took the apple from Delilah's palm, her whiskers tickling the sensitive skin. "She's beautiful," Delilah whispered, enraptured by the connection. "So are you," Sam said softly. Delilah turned to find him watching her, not the horse. The look in his eyes made her breath catch admiration, affection, and something deeper that made her heart race. With the wild horses as their only witnesses, Sam took a step closer. "Delilah," he said, his voice slightly rough with emotion, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. I know it hasn't been long, but I feel like I've known you forever." He took her hand in his. "I love you. I think I've loved you since I first saw you standing in that meadow, brave and beautiful even in the face of danger." Tears sprang to Delilah's eyes at his declaration. "I love you too, Sam, more than I thought possible." Sam's face lit with a joy that transformed his usually serious features. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a tender, questioning kiss. Delilah had been kissed before chased, proper kisses from approved suitors in Boston, but nothing like this. This was a promise, a beginning, a declaration. Her hands found their way to his shoulders as she returned the kiss, feeling as though something inside her that had been closed was finally opening, like a flower to the sun. When they finally parted, Sam rested his forehead against hers, his arms around her waist. "I don't have much to offer a lady like you," he said quietly. "Just this land, these horses, and my heart. But if that's enough—" "It's more than enough," Delilah interrupted. "It's everything I could want." They stood together in the meadow, surrounded by wild horses and the vastness of the California landscape, both knowing that their lives had irrevocably changed. What had begun with a dangerous stampede had blossomed into something neither of them had expected to find: a love as free and true as the wild horses that had brought them together. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long golden shadows across the land, Sam and Delilah rode back to Yuba City side by side, their horses moving in perfect synchronization. Something had shifted between them, a deepening of their connection, a certainty about their shared future. The kiss they had exchanged seemed to have sealed an unspoken agreement between them. Edward was waiting on the porch of the general store when they returned, his knowing smile suggesting he had anticipated the outcome of their day together. When Sam formally asked to speak with him in private, the older man's eyes twinkled with barely suppressed delight. "Uncle Edward has given us his blessing," Sam told Delilah when they emerged from the store's back room. "If you'll have me, I'd like to make you my wife." Though she had suspected this was coming after their declarations at the ranch, the official proposal still made Delilah's heart soar. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Yuba City. To Delilah's delight, the community embraced their union with enthusiasm. Ladies stopped by the store to offer congratulations and advice, while men clapped Sam on the shoulder when they saw him in town. It seemed their love story, beginning with that dramatic rescue from the stampede, had captured the town's collective imagination. They agreed on a December wedding, giving them time to prepare while not waiting unnecessarily long. In the weeks that followed, Delilah divided her time between helping at the store, visiting Sam's ranch to become more familiar with what would soon be her home, and making preparations for their life together. Sam threw himself into improvements at the ranch with renewed purpose. He added a proper kitchen to the cabin, built new shelves and a larger bed, and began clearing ground for the vegetable garden Delilah hoped to plant in the spring. Edward, meanwhile, insisted on providing them with quality furniture from his store as a wedding gift. "A lady needs certain comforts," he declared when Sam tried to protest the generosity, "and I've no one else to spend my money on." As the wedding day approached, an unexpected letter arrived for Delilah from her father's sister in Boston, responding to the news of her engagement. Aunt Marian expressed surprise at Delilah's choice to marry a common horse trainer in that wilderness, suggesting it wasn't too late to return to civilization and make a more suitable match. Delilah read the letter with a mixture of amusement and sadness for her aunt's limited understanding. The woman who had left Boston in grief 4 months ago was gone, transformed by her experiences and by her love for Sam. She penned a gentle but firm reply, explaining that she had found true happiness and purpose in California, and hoped her aunt might one day visit to see for herself the beauty of her new life. The wedding took place on a crisp December morning in Yuba City's small church. Though simple by Boston standards, it was the social event of the season for the frontier town. The church was decorated with pine boughs and red berries, filling the air with a fresh, woodsy scent. Nearly every resident of Yuba City and the surrounding farms and ranches attended, packing the modest building to capacity. Delilah wore a dress of ivory silk that her mother had packed for her journey west. Every young woman should have one truly fine gown, she had insisted, adorned with a sash of blue ribbon that matched Sam's eyes. Her hair was arranged in soft curls beneath a lace veil borrowed from Mrs. Peterson, who had tearfully declared it good luck to wear something that had blessed another happy marriage. When she walked down the aisle on Edward's arm, Delilah had eyes only for Sam, standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new suit. His expression as he watched her approach was one of such naked adoration that several ladies in the congregation were seen dabbing at their eyes. "You are the most beautiful sight I have ever beheld," he whispered when she reached him. They exchanged simple, heartfelt vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish one another through all of life's joys and sorrows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Sam's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, causing a ripple of approving murmurs through the congregation. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and relaxed, with tables laden with food contributed by well-wishers, music provided by local fiddlers, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As tradition dictated, Sam and Delilah led the first dance, moving together with the easy grace of two people perfectly attuned to one another. "Happy, Mrs. Irwin," Sam murmured as they turned about the floor. "Completely," Delilah replied, savoring the sound of her new name. "And you, Mr. Irwin, more than I ever thought possible," he answered, his eyes never leaving hers. As the celebration continued around them, Sam leaned close to whisper in her ear, "I have a surprise for you. We won't be spending our wedding night at the ranch." "Oh." Delilah looked up at him curiously. "I've arranged for us to stay at the Hawkins Hotel tonight," he explained, Thought you deserved at least one night of luxury before committing to life in a cabin." Delilah smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. The Hawkins Hotel was Yuba City's finest establishment, boasting actual carpets and brass beds, a far cry from Sam's rustic cabin. "That's very sweet, but you know I don't need luxury." "I know," he replied, his eyes warm. "That's why I want to give it to you anyway." Later that evening, after changing into a traveling dress and bidding farewell to the wedding guests, Delilah found herself being escorted up the grand staircase of the Hawkins Hotel on her husband's arm. The finest suite had been prepared for them, complete with a copper bathtub, fresh flowers, and a bottle of French champagne that must have cost Sam a small fortune. As the door closed behind them, leaving them truly alone for the first time as husband and wife, Delilah felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Sam seemed to sense her mood, keeping a respectful distance as he poured 2 glasses of champagne. "A toast," he said, handing her a glass. "To new beginnings, and to the bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. And to the most honorable, kind-hearted man," Delilah added softly, "who rode into chaos and changed my life forever." They sipped the champagne, eyes locked over the rims of their glasses. When Sam set his down and moved toward her, Delilah went willingly into his embrace. His kiss was different now, deeper, less restrained, filled with a passion he had carefully controlled until this moment. "I love you, Delilah Irwin," he murmured against her lips, "with everything I am." "And I love you, Samuel Irwin," she replied. "Today, tomorrow, always." What followed was a night of tender discovery and passionate awakening as they learned each other in the most intimate way. Sam was gentle and patient, guiding Delilah through her initial nervousness with whispered words of love and reassurance. In his arms, she found a joy and completion she had never imagined possible, their bodies and souls joining as fully as their lives had. In the quiet aftermath, lying in the circle of her husband's arms with her head on his chest, Delilah thought of the long journey that had brought her to this moment, from the grief and loss in Boston to the wild beauty of California, from the terror of that stampede to the safety of Sam's embrace. Every step, every moment had led her here, to this man and this love. "What are you thinking?" Sam asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the most frightening moments of our lives can lead us to the greatest joy," she replied, lifting her head to look into his eyes. "If those wild horses hadn't stampeded that day, I would have found you anyway," Sam said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Delilah. Some connections can't be broken or denied." She smiled, believing him. In this new land of endless possibilities, with this man who had claimed her heart so completely, anything seemed possible. Dawn found them still awake, watching the first rays of sunlight filter through the lace curtains of their hotel room. It was the beginning of their first day as husband and wife, the first day of the life they would build together. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Irwin?" Sam asked as they dressed in the early morning light. Home. The word had taken on new meaning for Delilah. It was no longer a place she had left behind in grief, but something new she was creating with Sam, a sanctuary built on love, mutual respect, and shared dreams. "Yes," she replied simply. "I'm ready." They rode out of Yuba City as the town was just beginning to stir, Delilah on Sunflower and Sam on Cinder, side by side as they would be for all the days to come. The journey to the ranch that would now be their shared home took them through the same meadow where they had first met, where wild horses had stampeded around her, and a brave cowboy had ridden into the chaos to carry her to safety. By unspoken agreement, they stopped there briefly, looking out over the landscape now peaceful in the morning light. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Delilah observed. "And yet only yesterday." Sam reached across the space between them to take her hand. "Some moments change everything." That was one of them. They continued on, cresting the familiar hill that overlooked Sam's now their property. In the clear morning light, the cabin looked welcoming with smoke curling from the chimney. Edward had sent a ranch hand ahead to light fires and stock the pantry as a wedding gift. As they approached, Delilah noticed something unusual in the meadow beyond the corral, a flash of movement that resolved itself into the forms of wild horses grazing peacefully. "Sam," she said, pointing. "Look." He followed her gaze, his expression shifting to one of wonder. "It's them." Midnight's herd. Sure enough, the magnificent black stallion stood at the edge of the group, his distinctive white star visible even at this distance. The herd had never ventured this close to the ranch before, preferring the more remote hills to the north. "Why are they here?" Delilah asked, amazed by the coincidence. Sam shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. "Maybe they've come to offer their blessing," he suggested, only half joking. "The Maidu would say it's a powerful sign." As if hearing his words, Midnight raised his proud head and looked directly at them. For a long moment, horse and humans regarded each other across the distance. Wild freedom, acknowledging its more domesticated counterpart. Then, with a toss of his mane that seemed almost like a nod of approval, the stallion turned and led his herd away at an unhurried trot, disappearing over the next rise. "Welcome home, Delilah," Sam said softly, squeezing her hand. As they rode the final distance to their cabin, Delilah felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged in this wild, beautiful land, with this good, honorable man, building a life that honored both freedom and commitment, both wildness and home. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The winter of 1874 was particularly harsh, testing their resilience as newlyweds. Sam spent long hours in the bitter cold, ensuring the horses had adequate shelter and feed, while Delilah learned the art of maintaining a home under frontier conditions. Yet even in those difficult months, they found warmth in each other's company, spending evenings by the fire reading aloud from Sam's collection of books, or simply talking about their dreams for the future. Spring brought renewal and growth. Delilah planted the vegetable garden she had envisioned, while Sam expanded the corral and began construction on a larger barn. Together, they added a proper porch to the cabin, creating a place where they could sit together in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. Sam's reputation as a horse trainer continued to grow, bringing clients from as far away as San Francisco. His particular gift for gentling wild horses without breaking their spirit became legendary throughout California. Delilah, meanwhile, discovered her own talent for breeding and raising horses, developing an intuitive understanding of bloodlines and characteristics that complemented Sam's training abilities perfectly. In the summer of 1875, they welcomed their first child, a son they named James Edward Irwin, after Sam's fallen brother and Delilah's beloved uncle. Edward Winters, now semi-retired from the general store, became a frequent visitor at the ranch, delighting in his role as honorary grandfather to the robust, blue-eyed boy who had his father's quiet intensity and his mother's curious nature. Life fell into a rhythm that balanced work and family, challenge and contentment. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, gradually expanding to include more land, better facilities, and a growing reputation for excellence. The cabin evolved as well, with the addition of a nursery for James and improvements that made it more comfortable without sacrificing its essential character. Through it all, Sam and Delilah's love deepened and matured. The passion that had marked the early days of their marriage remained, but it was now enriched by shared experiences, mutual respect, and the daily demonstration of commitment in both word and deed. They faced setbacks together, crop failures, harsh winters, a fire that destroyed part of the barn, drawing strength from each other, and emerging more united with each challenge overcome. In 1877, their family expanded again with the arrival of a daughter, Sarah Louise, a delicate beauty with her mother's honey blonde hair and her father's thoughtful demeanor. James, now 2, appointed himself his sister's protector, a role he took very seriously despite his tender age. It was around this time that Sam and Delilah made an important decision. With their business thriving and their family growing, they agreed it was time to build the larger house they had sometimes discussed. But rather than replacing the original cabin, they chose to expand it, adding rooms and amenities while preserving the core structure that had sheltered them in their early days together. "This place holds too many memories to abandon," Sam explained as they reviewed the plans he had drawn. "Our first home together should remain part of our future." Delilah, touched by his sentiment, agreed wholeheartedly. The renovations took nearly a year to complete, with Sam doing much of the work himself between his training commitments. The result was a home that honored both their past and their present, comfortable without being ostentatious, spacious without losing the intimacy they valued. Through these years of growth and change, the wild horses remained a constant presence in their lives. Midnight's herd continued to roam the hills surrounding their property, occasionally venturing close enough to be observed from the house. Sam maintained his practice of helping injured wild horses, treating them and releasing them back to the herd when healed. He also continued his selective breeding program, crossing wild bloodlines with domesticated stock to create horses of exceptional strength and intelligence. Delilah never lost her fascination with these magnificent creatures. She often accompanied Sam on his expeditions to observe the herds, bringing the children along as they grew old enough to appreciate the experience. James, in particular, inherited his father's affinity for horses, showing a natural talent for training even at a young age. "Like father, like son," Delilah remarked one evening as they watched 4-year-old James confidently leading a gentle mare around the corral under Sam's watchful eye. "He'll be better than me someday," Sam replied with evident pride. "He has your patience and my stubbornness, a powerful combination." Life wasn't without its sorrows. In the winter of 1879, they received word that Edward had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The loss hit Delilah hard. Her uncle had been her last connection to her parents, the bridge between her old life and new. Sam supported her through her grief with the same steady presence she had always relied upon, understanding without needing to be told what this loss meant to her. Following Edward's wishes, they used part of their inheritance to establish a small school in Yuba City, ensuring the growing community's children would have access to education. Delilah occasionally taught there when a regular teacher couldn't be found, discovering yet another talent in the process. The Irwin Ranch, as it came to be known throughout the region, continued to prosper as the years passed. By 1883, they had expanded to over 500 acres, with specialized breeding and training facilities that drew clients and admirers from across the country. Their methods, particularly Sam's humane approach to training and Delilah's innovative breeding program, became widely respected and often emulated. That summer, as they celebrated 10 years of marriage, Sam surprised Delilah with a journey to San Francisco, their first real vacation since their wedding. For 2 glorious weeks, They enjoyed the luxuries of city life, fine restaurants, theater performances, shopping expeditions, while their now capable ranch hands and a trusted neighbor looked after James and Sarah. "You ever miss this?" Sam asked as they strolled along the busy streets, taking in the sights and sounds of the rapidly growing city. The energy, the opportunities of urban life. Delilah considered the question seriously. "I appreciate visiting," she admitted, "but no, I don't miss it. Our life has everything I truly value: purpose, beauty, family, freedom." She squeezed his hand. "And love. Most importantly, love." The look Sam gave her then, full of tenderness and enduring passion, made her feel as young and breathless as she had on that first day in the meadow when he had swept her onto his horse and out of danger. "I fall in love with you a little more each day, Delilah Irwin," he said simply. 10 years, and you still surprise and delight me." Their return to the ranch after this interlude was like coming home in the deepest sense to the land they had nurtured, the animals they had raised, the children who completed their family. James, now 8, and Sarah, 6, greeted them with enthusiastic stories of their adventures during their parents' absence. The rhythm of their life together resumed, all the sweeter for the brief separation. In the spring of 1885, their family was completed with the arrival of another son, Thomas William, a sturdy baby with a shock of dark hair and his mother's gentle eyes. His birth was easier than the previous two, and Delilah recovered quickly, soon returning to her roles as mother, partner in the ranch business, and heart of their home. As their children grew, Sam and Delilah made sure to pass on not only practical skills, but also the values they held dear: respect for nature and animals, honesty, hard work, and the importance of following one's heart even when the path isn't easy. They shared the story of their meeting, often the wild horses, the dramatic rescue, the gradual blossoming of love, much to the children's delight. "Tell us again about when Papa saved you from the stampede," Sarah would beg at bedtime, her eyes wide with excitement, though she had heard the tale countless times. "Your father was the bravest man I'd ever seen," Delilah would begin, catching Sam's eye across the room with a smile that held years of shared memories. The wild horses remained a constant presence in their lives. Midnight eventually grew old and was succeeded as herd leader by one of his sons, but the herd itself continued to thrive under the informal protection the Irwins provided. Local authorities, recognizing the ecological and historical importance of maintaining wild horse populations, eventually designated the area north of the ranch as a protected zone, a development Sam and Delilah had advocated for years. Life brought changes, as it inevitably does. James grew into a serious young man with his father's gift for horses and his mother's head for business. At 18, he began taking on more responsibility at the ranch, introducing new ideas while respecting the traditions his parents had established. Sarah developed an unexpected talent for art, her drawings and paintings of horses gaining recognition beyond Yuba City. Thomas, the youngest, combined his siblings' talents with a natural charm that made him a favorite throughout the community. Through it all, the children's growth, the expansion of their business, the changes in the wider world, Sam and Delilah's partnership remained the bedrock of their existence. They disagreed at times, faced challenges that tested their resolve, and occasionally had to compromise on their individual visions. But the fundamental respect and love between them never wavered. On a golden autumn afternoon in 1893, 20 years after their first meeting, Sam and Delilah rode out together to visit the meadow where their story had begun. Both were now in their 40s, with strands of silver in their hair and lines of experience etched on their faces. But Sam still sat tall and straight in the saddle, and Delilah's eyes still sparkled with the same spirit that had first captured his heart. They dismounted at the edge of the meadow, now familiar ground they had visited many times over the years. Sam took Delilah's hand as they walked to the exact spot where she had stood that day, flowers in hand, as the wild horses thundered toward her. 20 years, he mused, looking out over the landscape that had changed little despite the passage of time. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. And sometimes it feels like I've known you forever, Delilah replied, leaning against his shoulder. As though my life before you was just preparation for what was to come. Sam's arm circled her waist, drawing her close. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if those horses hadn't stampeded that day? If our paths hadn't crossed right here? Delilah looked up at him, at the face she had loved for 2 decades now weathered by sun and wind, but still essentially the same. The blue eyes that had captured her heart, the strong jaw that still tensed when he was worried, the gentle mouth that could make her feel like the only woman in the world with just a smile. I believe we would have found each other anyway, she said with certainty. Some things are meant to be, remember. You told me that on our wedding night. I was right, Sam affirmed, his voice deep with emotion. The best decisions of my life were joining the cavalry, coming west after the war, and riding into that stampede to save a beautiful woman with flowers in her hair. As if summoned by their memories, the distant thunder of hooves reached their ears. They turned together to see a herd of wild horses peering over the rise descendants of the very herd that had changed their lives all those years ago. At their head ran a magnificent black stallion, so like midnight that it took Delilah's breath away. Life comes full circle, Sam murmured, holding her close as they watched the horses sweep across the landscape in a display of wild, unfettered freedom. Standing there together, with the sun warming their shoulders and wild horses running free before them, Sam and Delilah Irwin felt the full measure of the life they had built together, a life rich with purpose, passion, and the enduring love that had begun in a moment of danger and courage. What had started with chaos had transformed into a harmony more beautiful than either could have imagined on that fateful day when wild horses had stampeded around her, and a cowboy had ridden into the chaos to carry her to safety. Their story, like the wild horses themselves, would run free across the California hills for generations to come, a testament to courage, second chances, and the transformative power of love.